Good evening. I am Dr. John Stracks, and I am here in Chicago and with my friend and patient, David Holmes, who's going to be talking in just a few minutes about his journey through chronic back pain over the last few decades. So if you're watching and joining us this evening, you're likely interested in mind-body medicine, and you may have viewed some of our previous Hope for Healing episodes. You may also know some about my background. I am the director of the only mind-body medicine program here in the city of Chicago. I have had experiences in the past of my own with chronic pain, which you can hear about on Curable podcasts. I'm also a medical advisor for Curable and now the director of this Hope for Healing series, where I talk with other mind-body medicine practitioners and also patients who have successfully healed their chronic symptoms with these methods. And so tonight, David will talk about his journey through back pain over several decades of time, how he's been able to get better, and I think even more importantly, stay better. He's an attorney here in Chicago and by all measures has a fairly ordinary, happy life. He's been married for over 30 years, has two children who have recently launched into adulthood, has always been healthy as an athlete and was really doing fine by every stretch until he developed back pain 17 years ago. And his recovery from that has been remarkable. He has frequently shared that journey with my patients, and we wanted all of you to have the opportunity to hear him speak as well. So, David, thanks for joining us tonight, and welcome to the Hope for Healing series. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Doctor. It's always good to see you. Thank you for that introduction, and hello, everyone. I'm always thrilled to be able to speak to anyone who is interested in mind-body medicine because I know what it's done for me. And as far as I am concerned, it's pretty much saved my life. It's interesting that Dr. Stracks says that I've dealt with back pain because frankly, I haven't thought about having back pain for over a decade, so it doesn't even occur to me. But there was a time when that's all I thought about. And, interestingly enough, so I'm a lawyer, I work for a pretty big law firm, and probably, 3, 4, 5, 6 years after I cured my pain, I would still have some of my partners say, "Hey, how's your back? You look like you're doing pretty good." And I would say, well, I don't have any back problems. So let me go back, no pun intended, and tell you how it started for me and how I worked through everything.
Good. And before you do,
Yeah.
Dave, I just want to talk just for 1 second, maybe longer than a second, about terminology as it relates to mind-body medicine.
Sure.
Because you and I had both heard about this concept initially from a physician in New York named Dr. John Sarno, who's been a mentor of mine and was until he passed away a few years ago. And so at Curable, those of you who are using the app and have been around me, we generally refer to it as mind-body medicine these days. But Dave and I, you and I both heard about it in this term tension myositis syndrome, or TMS, which is a term that Dr. Sarno coined back in the 1980s and 1990s. And he was really the first physician that I'm aware of who understood this connection between mind and body, that what happens in our lives will show up in our bodies, and that the solution to healing the pain is to think about it from these non-physical standpoints, such as our thoughts and emotions and experiences. And so Dr. Sarno wrote several books. Both of you and I have read those books and found them useful. There was a lot that he got right about what we know about mind-body medicine, and a lot he didn't know as well. And so the work that I do, the work that Curable does, the work that we all do together has taken those initial ideas from the 1980s and 90s and really expanded the scientific evidence for them and the state-of-the-art treatments, and we feel like we've really pushed it forward. And so for those of you listening, if you hear Dave and I use the term TMS, which we've been using for literally for decades, know that we're talking about mind-body medicine, the way it's practiced these days in the 21st century. So with that, I will turn it over to you and listen to what happened to you in 2003, I think.
Right. Yeah, it goes about, that's about right. So I was about 40 years old, and as Dr. Stracks said, doing fine, happily married, two wonderful children, a good job, a little bit stressful, but and physically very active. And I started having, I would call it at first minor back pain, and a little bit annoyed with it, but wasn't paying too much attention to it. And then it continued to kind of get worse week after week, week after week, but nothing debilitating where I couldn't walk or anything like that, but it was starting to get worse. So I went to an orthopedic doctor. They took some film and said, you've got degenerative discs at L4, L5, and that's what's causing your pain. And so I said, okay, well, what can I do now? And they said, not much. You're going to have to learn to live with it. You can manage it with stretching, physical therapy, taking, Tylenol, things like that. So that was a hard thing to hear because it was starting to interfere with my life. I used to play a lot of basketball and I ran, and those things, I wasn't able to do those things anymore. I was also having a difficult time sitting, as I am now, in my office. Sitting in my chair at my office was really challenging. Sitting in a car was challenging. And so I started trying different things. Physical therapy. I went to a chiropractor, and nothing was working all that well. Even though these folks were convinced that they could get me better, I wasn't getting better. I was actually getting a little bit worse. So my wife one day called me up and said, I'm coming to visit you at lunch. I'm going to pick you up at your office and we're going to go to Relax the Back store. And we're going to find a chair that you can sit in comfortably, because I was really starting to struggle sitting in this chair at work. So that was very nice of her. We go to the Relax the Back store. She's suggesting chairs for me. I'm sitting down in chairs. Nothing feels comfortable. I get a little bit annoyed with the whole process. And I gravitate to a bookshelf. I like to read a lot. And I start thumbing through this book, which is Back Remedies for Dummies, which you've probably seen these books, these Remedies for Dummies books. They're yellow with black lettering and they cover a variety of topics. So there is actually one called Back Remedies for Dummies. And I'm browsing through it and I have no idea why, but I land on this one page and it's just like a page, probably even a half a page. And it says, well, there's this doctor in New York named Dr. Sarno at NYU, and he believes that your pain is being caused by it's psychological, it's emotional, and it has to do with your unconscious mind, which sounded crazy and ridiculous to me. But then the next paragraph that I read said, Dr. Sarno thinks that people with a certain personality that are perfectionists, that are always trying to help other people, that are trying to do good, that they're more prone to this problem. And that resonated with me because that's my personality profile. So I thought, well, that's pretty interesting and nothing has been working. So I'm going to check out this book. So they didn't have that book on the bookshelf. They just had Back Remedies for Dummies. But so I went and got the book and, I read it and I found it frankly kind of hard to believe. I did not really at first appreciate that my back could be caused by my mind, this unconscious mind. And so I kind of thought interesting, but I don't know that I can accept this. but my back wasn't getting any better. So a few weeks go by, I decided, well, let me try to apply some of this practice, which is, like Dr. Stracks said, appreciating that the issue is not a structural issue in your back or whatever physical ailment you're dealing with. It's in your mind. And so I started to do some things that Dr. Sarno recommended, like reading passages in the book every day to kind of make a connection in your mind, you know. And I started talking to myself and saying, look, okay, maybe this isn't a structural issue. Maybe it's not degenerative disc. And surprisingly, I started to get better. I was pretty amazed. I would say that I followed Dr. Sarno's advice, maybe 60 to 70% of what he was saying should be done. But I got a lot better pretty quickly, and kind of started going back to doing things that I was doing before. Even gave Dr. Sarno's book away to my mother-in-law, who had a lot of issues that I thought, okay, you could probably benefit from this.
Did she ever read it?
She didn't, no. Yeah, we tried. I was going along for probably 4 or 5 months, doing pretty well. And then one morning I woke up and started to get out of bed, and I had the worst back pain I've ever felt, and the worst pain I've probably ever felt in my life. I was pretty much paralyzed. I couldn't move, and I had no idea what was going on. Woke up my wife, said, I've got a real problem. I'm in excruciating pain, and we're gonna have to get to the doctor. So we were able to actually get back to the doctor that day. And he basically said, well, look, this is what you're gonna have to deal with. This is what we talked about. So you've got a flare up, and you know, we'll give you some muscle relaxers, and this is gonna happen. You're just gonna have to live with this. It's gonna happen from time to time. So that was devastating to me. And so I started thinking, well, what can I do? And the doctor said, well, you could try physical therapy again. So I actually tried physical therapy, did this McKenzie method, which, doctor, I think you've heard about. And it involves some goofy thing where you're kind of doing this with your back. And, you know, so for a week, I'm in excruciating pain. I wasn't going to work. I was laying on the floor, canceled a camping trip that the whole family was going to do. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. You know, I don't know if I was 40 or 41 at the time. And I'm thinking, if this is going to be my life, this is horrible. For some strange reason, you know, by the end of that week, laying on my floor in the family room, I started thinking about Dr. Sarno again. And initially, after this excruciating pain, my first thought was, well, okay, that theory doesn't work because I'm having this excruciating pain. So, you know, I just kind of discounted it. But by the end of the week, I don't know, something told me I should go back and take another look at this. So I asked my wife, this is before you could get a book on Amazon or anything. I said, when you go out to the store, could you find this book again? And she agreed to do that. While she was out, I decided I want to even just see if I can get on Dr. Sarno's website. So I literally crawled from one room in our family room to another room where we had our computer and punched up the website and started reading what Dr. Sarno had on the website. And it was the craziest thing ever, because within minutes, I started feeling a little bit of relief. And that freaked me out. I mean, I was like, whoa, what is going on? I went from sweat streaming down my face because I was in so much pain to, you know, not feeling great, but feeling a little bit of relief. And that really registered with me. And so my wife brought the book home. I read it, for the next 2 days, cover to cover. And I went all in on the methods that Dr. Sarno was putting out there at that time, which, was again, thinking about what's going on in your mind and your unconscious mind, that you have these other parts of your brain, of your mind that you don't know about. I did a lot of digging into my life and going back and trying to think about what are the stressors, what are the things in my life that are stuck in my mind that I haven't dealt with. I went back a long way to the time when I was a little kid, and grew up in a house, the oldest of 4 boys, a rambunctious, kind of crazy Irish family with young adult parents. My parents were very young, and I'm the oldest. And they're wonderful people. They've both passed, but they didn't know what they were doing. None of us do when we're parents, right? But so there were things that happened when I was a little kid that I thought about. They definitely, my parents were of the, spare the rod, spoil the child mentality. And, I think my dad got a little carried away a few times with me. And I laugh about those things now, but I spent a lot of time thinking about those things and realized that I think that they caused real pain, and pain that I never really ever even considered. And so those were some things that I spent a lot of time thinking about and became very emotional about, and kind of releasing some pain with those things that I never even knew was there. Also, another major event that had happened in my life before is that my mother had passed away at a pretty young age, at age 59. I'm the person in the family that is, calm, and nothing ever gets to me, so during when she died of cancer and during her sickness, which was pretty short, she did not last long after getting her diagnosis. I was the one who was always there, being calm and there, during the funeral, as the one who gave the eulogy, and again, very calm, and everybody's saying, "Oh, you're handling this so well," that kind of thing. And I think that I never really dealt with that grief in the way that I needed to deal with it. So that was another thing that I really focused on.
Do you have any sense of the timing on that, about sort of how long after your mom passed away that these back episodes started? You may not be able to remember specifically, but
yeah, it wasn't back issues at first. I had immediate stomach issues.
mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this, where I was diagnosed with a hiatal hernia, and that diagnosis came immediately after my mom died, or within a few months. Was told that I would have to take acid reflux medication forever, and I'll come back to this, but I don't take that medication anymore, because knowing what I know now, and I figured out that it wasn't a physical hiatal hernia, really. It was the emotional trauma of dealing with my mother's death. Right.
And the timing is interesting because I frequently will hear people get sick 2 to 3 months after a parent passes away. And so my patients who are in the mind-body medicine world, like, we're looking out for things like that. But when I worked at the hospital and people would come in and they weren't feeling well, I'd ask them about stressors, and a surprisingly high amount of the time, somebody would say, like, "Oh, my dad passed away 3 months ago." It was always that kind of couple months time frame. And one time I was talking with a patient and we were talking about that possibility that that's what was causing her physical symptoms. She's like, it's impossible. Like, I spoke at his funeral, I grieved, I cried, I was with my family. Like, there's no way that's stuck in me. And my take home from that conversation with her was that there's this physical aspect to mourning that just we can't really get at in any other way. This part of the mourning process gets into our bodies.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And as you know, and we'll talk about a little later, when my other parent died, we had some major issues.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, in terms of timing, when I had this really bad episode, we've talked about this before, and I don't know whether my mother's death was a trigger. What I can tell you is the timing was the summer, and my mom was diagnosed, like right around Memorial Day weekend, and we only had, 2.5 months with her. And so that was a challenging summer. And, I don't know, but I just wonder whether there was something about coming around again to the summertime and whether that brought up some things for me. The good news is that after really applying daily everything, thinking about the mind issues, that I did start to feel better. And it took some time this time. I would say within a couple of weeks, I got to the point where I could walk okay, with pain still shooting down my leg, but I could walk, and I wasn't, debilitated, but I was still having pain, so it was a gradual process. I think about a 3-month process, probably. And so it was okay within a month, okay, walking pretty well, not too much pain, still having some pain sitting, but I'm able to sit, I'm able to get back to work. Probably about a month in, I started trying to get back into physical activity. I started trying to run, which was really, really hard and painful. I refused to stop running. And Dr. Stracks has heard me tell this story many times, but I would start kind of swearing at myself as I was running down the road. And if somebody was driving by, they would think I was a crazy person. But I would yell out loud as I was running, "I don't care, this pain is not gonna stop me from running. You're not gonna stop me from doing this. I'm gonna keep running." And it hurt. And, it took 3 or 4 sessions where it didn't hurt anymore, but each time it got a little better. So I just refused to give in to any notion that there was a physical component to what was going on. I would say it took about 3 months. That's it. The back pain that I struggled with for 2 or 3 years probably has never come back. Now, there have been, I would say, about a half dozen times that I have started to feel some tension in my back, and a couple of times where I've even felt like a little bit of shooting pain coming back down my leg. And I've immediately gone to, okay, what's going on? What's going on in my life? Why would this be happening? And it goes away. Like, it's never lasted more than a day, which is remarkable, amazing, incredible, but it's true. So that's been fantastic. And so how did I meet Dr. Stracks? Because I figured out my back problem and fixed it well before we connected. But I think it was about 8 years ago, right, that I started having this strange and pretty significant arm pain going from like my forearm up all the way up my bicep. And went to my internist who's a lovely doctor who's taken care of me for a lot of other things. And he said, well, you've strained some ligaments. And I thought, well, how did I do that? And he said, well, you could do it. Did you lift weights this week? Yeah, I did. Oh, you probably did it doing that. And I said, okay, that's weird, but okay. And this happens, I think, where all of a sudden I'm not thinking about how I cured my back. I'm just, going to the doctor, tell me what's wrong. And he said, okay, take some anti-inflammatories, put on this brace, and don't do anything for a few weeks. So I actually went to the pharmacy, bought a brace, got the prescription, and I wore this stupid brace for like 2 days. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? This is the same thing. It's just now in my arm instead of in my back. And my wife had clipped out this article that Dr. Stracks was in the Chicago Tribune, and it was describing how you had started practicing mind-body medicine and that you had learned from Dr. Sarno. And she had kept that. And I said, all right, I need to go see this guy, because now I've got this arm thing going on and I think I know what it is. And so that's how we met, right? And so I go in to see you. I said, look, I know a lot about this, but I clearly forgot about it because I went to my internist and put on this brace, but now I think I know what it is. And you said, that's entirely what it is. We talked about what was going on with me at that time, and you're like, yeah, that's, what this is. That's entirely what it is. And the best thing that you said to me was, I said, well, should I not do anything right now? He's like, oh God, no, go back to lifting weights. It was just like, okay, and sure enough, that pain was gone in a few days. It was done.
I've got a funny story about arm pain, actually, because I've been doing a lot of yoga during quarantine, because what else are you going to do? So I hooked up with this studio near where my sister lives in North Carolina. So I'm taking their online classes. And I was driving home like a week ago, and I turned the wheel in my car funny, and I got this pain in my hand. And so I'm like, oh, did I strain something? Did I do something? And so it's kind of been a little bit annoying for the past week. And I started thinking about it. And I took a couple of days off. And then this morning, I was doing some yoga. I was feeling pretty good. And I was like, maybe it's carpal tunnel syndrome. Like, is that possible? So I Googled carpal tunnel syndrome, like, how do you heal it naturally? And the only thing that came up were all these big websites for these, for all the major medical centers, Cleveland Clinic and Stanford and Mayo. And so I clicked on one of the articles and it was like, do you have carpal tunnel syndrome? Like, your life is over, as you know. If you get into a body cast and you don't move for 2.5 weeks, maybe you'll be okay. I was like, oh my, like, this is what the system does to people.
Yeah, right.
And so I was like, there's some exciting things that are going on. Like, it's a little bit of a distraction, and I've been fine all day.
Yeah. Yeah. You of all people should know.
I know.
Yeah.
Even I forget sometimes.
Yeah, we do. We forget, right? So, so we've been, friends since then, and I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of Dr. Stracks patients, which has been really great for me because, I just love talking to people about this because I know how powerful it is. And I can be really annoying at cocktail parties because if I find out somebody has been dealing with a back problem or some other problem, I want to tell them about this. And I have to pick and choose my spots, because some people just automatically do not want to hear it. I have partners in my law office, some who have been very receptive and some who have cured their own problems after me talking to them about it. And then others that think that I'm absolutely crazy, right? But I did talk to this guy at a cocktail party who I didn't know all that well. Our kids were playing on the same soccer team, and he was saying he doesn't bike anymore. He was a big biker, and he's not biking anymore because he has back problems. And I said, do you have 10 minutes to hear a story? And he listened kind of skeptically, and I didn't think anything of it. 2 months later, this guy emailed me, and I don't even know how he found my email, and said, I cannot thank you enough. I am doing great. I'm biking again. I got the book. This is amazing. And I can tell you, that that has happened a fair number of times with people that I've spoken to that are open to this. And so it's incredible. So we said that Dr. Stracks and I talked about the final chapter that we should talk about with me, that Dr. Stracks has been great and has helped me work through. So I said that both my parents have passed. And so my dad died about a little over 2.5 years ago now. And it was only a couple weeks after his funeral that I noticed a lump in my neck and didn't think that much of it. I actually noticed it the day of the funeral and thought that's kind of weird. But knowing what I know about grief and the mind and everything, I thought that's a little strange. And then I thought it went away, and then I noticed it again, and I went to see Dr. Stracks and said, it's been a lot going on with my dad. And actually, we had met before he died because we talked about some kind of tough issues that I was having with him. And you thought, well, I think this is TMS, but let's get it checked out, right? And so we did get it checked out, and unfortunately, it was not good news. And it turned out that I had throat cancer, and it had also traveled to the lymph nodes in my neck. That was a tough day to get that news. And so the good news is that I was able to have surgery and a radiation treatment that was rough, but worked. And so I'm now 2 years and a couple months since the end of my treatment, and I've been incredibly healthy, grateful that that medicine worked. Do I wonder whether the issues going on with my dad, even before he passed away and when he passed away, could have helped trigger what was going on? I do. I mean, there's definitely a biological, chemical explanation for my cancer, which was caused by the HPV virus. But why was it triggered at that time? It makes me wonder.
And it's an interesting point. So I just want to highlight a couple of that. You and I talked earlier about this, but I tell that story anonymously regularly because it comes up regularly in these circles. Like, as you learn more and more that physical symptoms don't have a physical cause, how do you know when one might? And so when I tell this story, I say that, you and I had talked, I knew that your dad had been sick and was likely going to die. And you called me up and said, I had this big lump in my throat the morning of his funeral. And I was like, well, of course you did. Like,
yeah,
how, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that particular metaphor. And I think you said, like, it's a pretty big lump. I was like, all right, well, let me take a look at it just in case, thinking that it was nothing. And then you walked into my office and you had this big lump in your neck. And the way I normally describe it is that, like, again, it didn't take a rocket scientist to look at it and say, like, that's out of place there. And so I think any physician who would have taken a look at it would have said, something doesn't seem right here. Yeah. And so I use that one as an example of, oftentimes if there is something that we need to find physically, it's hard to miss. And so that particular lump on your neck was hard to miss. I don't know if you, from your standpoint, had any thoughts about why you needed to check with me to see if it needed to get checked out at the time.
That's a good question. I don't really know. I don't remember it being as big as you remember it.
I know. Yeah.
it was probably more noticeable to you than it was to me.
Hmm.
Um, I just, it didn't go away, right?
I think
So I
that's my
noticed
memory.
it the day of the funeral, and then I kind of forgot about it for a few weeks, and then it hadn't gone away, and that was enough for me to go, oh, that's a little weird. I should check in with you and see what's going on.
Yeah. And
Good
I
thing we
think,
did.
yeah, I'm glad we did. And I
Yeah,
think that that's another point that I try to point out to people is that if there is something that we need to catch, there are oftentimes multiple chances to catch it. And so it's very, very rare that something would pop up so quickly that it would be catastrophic all in the moment. And so it was there, it was gone, it came back, it stuck around. You called me, even if I had said, hopefully I wouldn't, but it's a lump in your throat. Your dad died. I'm sure it will go away. At some point, you would have gone back and had your
sure.
internist check it out, and you're fine. That's the
Yeah,
other important part of that. Like we caught it at a point where there was effective treatment, and you did that, and you've been fine.
here I am. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah, so I'm dealing with a little bit of a heel issue right now. My left Achilles heel has like some tendonitis, and again, you kind of forget. So and I'm running, right? So, and biking, and if we can get back in a pool, I'll get back to doing triathlons, which my wife and I really like to do. Um, so, but I've been backing off of the running because of this heel issue, and um, I think the last session that we did with a group of your patients kind of motivated me to really kind of recommit to the mind. And not that I wasn't before, because I was, but I've I've gone in more, and the heel's getting better. I mean, it's just, I was telling my wife, like, this is ridiculous, but she's like, have you been stretching more? No. Are you icing? No, I'm not icing it at all anymore. I'm just doing this, and it's getting better. I mean, it's crazy, but it works. So
Absolutely. And so I have a couple questions for you. Thanks
sure, of
for sharing all that with us.
course.
And I know there are some questions that have come in for us that I'll start reading in a few minutes. There are a few people here with us on Zoom. I know that there are people watching over on Facebook. And so anybody who has questions that they'd like to send to us, you can send them either through the chat here in Zoom, or you can put it into the chat box in Facebook, and our curable staff will grab those and forward them to us. And so we can stick around probably until, at least until the hour, if not a little bit past. And so there should be some time
Sure.
to answer people questions. But if you're listening at home and you have some, go ahead and put that into the available chat box, and we will collate them here and start trying to answer your questions. And so, Dave, a couple other questions I had for you that I think most we've talked about in the past, but talking with other people, whether it's friends or family members or people you don't know that well, I get that question often from groups that I speak to or people who come to see me. I normally say that people are ready to hear this when they're ready to hear it, which I think for the most part is true. And so most people I know tread pretty lightly in who they tell, but you're in a group of people who I think is more assertive in giving out the information, or even I think you said at times like you keep copies of Dr. Sarno's book in your office to
Right.
pass out to people. And so what are some strategies that you've done to try to get this information across to people who you think either want to hear it or just should hear it?
Yeah. Great question. So, I kind of break it down into a couple of different categories of people. There are people that I know, right? And so with those people that I know, um, I'm usually going to try. Okay. And then there are some people that I know that there's I'm going to try, but I'm going to stop pretty quickly because they're just not ready. They're not interested. And so I'm not going to do much with them. There's the people that I know that are kind of in a middle ground. And I'm gonna stay on those people. And then there are the people that it's kind of easy, which is great. You know, they're like, oh, I totally get this. This absolutely makes sense. So, but those people in the middle, you know, you want to keep chatting with them, you know, and you know, it's like any conversation, whether it's this topic or something else, you have to read your audience and know how they're doing and whether they're really listening and ready to listen. I tried with my dad because he, you know, in his last, you know, 10 years of his life really had a lot of different health issues. And he would get very frustrated with me. And, you know, to the point where he'd be like, if you say Dr. Sarno to me one more time, I'm going to lose it, you know? So, you know, I reached a point with him where I had to stop, you know, because it wasn't going to work. And he really, it would have worked for him, but he was just not going to get there. So then there's the other group of people, which are people that you don't really know that well. And that's trickier, you know, like, you know, in the gym I belong to, you know, I can't tell you, you know, there's a handful of people that are like, well, I'm going to get surgery. You know, I've had this back problems and, you know, my surgery is scheduled for a month. And that's a tough one because you're like, you know, you probably don't need that surgery, and surgery is never, you know, it's always risky, right? And so there are times when I've gone out on a limb and said, would you like to hear about something else? But then there are other times when it's been my own judgment that I'm not going to help them by talking about it. They've got a course that they've planned, right? And they're on that course, and you know, hopefully that will work for them, right? You know, placebo effect, whatever. So it's a real judgment call on that one. If they don't have surgery, you know, then I try with, you know, people that are more just acquaintances. You know, you read them. If they're getting annoyed, you know, then you just stop, right? But I try. Yeah.
And family members can be particularly tricky. Like I've
Yeah.
had conversations with people in my extended family who you know me, have known me my entire life, love me, and they just like stare, and
Oh yeah.
occasionally those conversations will last for 10 seconds and then
Oh yeah.
it's over. So a couple more questions I have for you, and then we're going to take some questions from people who are sending them in. But back to when it first started and you had that flare up, I'm thinking about flare ups because they're so common, and you had been doing quite well, and then you got out of bed that morning. Do you know sort of how you remembered that you had gotten better with Dr. Sarno? Like, do you have any memory of like what triggered that in your mind after, you know, a week on the floor to say like, hey, like, I've been here before, and you may not.
Yeah. I don't really know. I mean, the first time around was pretty easy, you know. So I don't have a lot of clear recollection of what I did that worked that first time around. It was almost like, okay, read the book, think about this a little bit, and you know, it was pretty easy. And the second time around was not easy. It was a lot of work to get better. It was, you know, really focusing on reading the book every day, journaling, thinking about things. You know, I got Dr. Sarno's video on his group sessions. I watched those, I listened to those. But yeah, so I don't really know. There was just something about thinking about, well, it worked before, right? And the McKenzie method going like this isn't working. the chiropractor before wasn't working. And I can remember going back to the chiropractor and saying, I wrote her a letter because I remember talking to her the first time when things were getting better. I was still seeing the chiropractor for a little while. And I said, I found this book and it's interesting. And she was like, and she's really well-intentioned and professional. And she said, that's not going to help you. And so I ended up writing to her the second time around after I was doing great. I said, it did help. And you really, I know you're well-intentioned and you want to help people. You should put this in your arsenal. I never heard from her. It wouldn't have been good for business. So
Interestingly, there are chiropractors who understand this. There are chiropractors in Chicago who understand this, who we share patients with. There's a huge network now. You and I were just talking about this before we got started, of physical therapists who really understand the pain science and know how to apply it and the work that they're doing. And so it's been a nice convergence of a variety of modalities that are all kind of being able to take this mind-body connection and make it work for people. My last question for you is sort of going back to that same time frame, the second time you got better and going out. And I always love the visual of you running around Oak Park, dragging your leg behind you, yelling at yourself as you were doing it. But it's also a frequent question that I get from my patients and people who I'm speaking with. How do you get back into exercise? And so one of the things that helped you back then was your assurance that you weren't harming yourself in doing that. Do you have any recollection of how you knew in your heart, right? That's a switch that everybody has to make, from knowing in their head that they're okay to knowing in their heart that they're gonna be okay. Do you have a sense of what allowed you to get back out and do the running, even though it was painful, and to be able to say to yourself with confidence that you were going to be okay?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when you go and you get diagnosed with a herniated disc or degenerative disc, they basically tell you to stop doing things, and don't lift anything because that's going to hurt you, and that is so bad, because then you stop doing the things that you used to do, and it just feeds on itself and you get worse and worse, right? So I found that Dr. Sarno's book made a lot of points that resonated with me, at least in terms of back pain. And, you're supposedly impinging a nerve. Well, okay, why does it only happen sometimes? That was a big one for me. It's like, well, that makes sense. If it was a nerve issue that was impinged somehow, why didn't it happen all the time? So that was really big for me. So I don't know why. I mean, I think maybe because I started to get better the first time around, I just was convinced that it's not a structural issue. I'm not going to do any harm to myself. I just bought into it. I think because I was getting better, and it was kind of like, well, what do you have to lose? If the discs are messed up and they need to be fixed at some point, okay, well, you don't have anything to lose. But I think that that's huge, to be able to get to that point, and trust that, because if you don't get there, I think you're going to have a big stumbling block.
Absolutely. And like I said, it moves from the head into the body, the knowledge that you're going to be okay. Yeah. And so, one thing that I tell people to do is learn as much as you can about the science of pain. That's one of the places Curable is so great, because there's so much pain education there. That obviously there's other books and lectures and websites about it. And so I think the more we learn it in our head, the more it starts to drop down in our body. We start to be sure of it. I also know that, as you said, I frequently will see patients and say, like, hey, I'm giving you Dave's email. I want you to talk with him. I was just talking to one of my patients about that Monday night, who said how meaningful his conversation with you was when he was first learning about this. And so talking with other people, seeing that other people have had experience with this and success with this, I think that's a big step
Yeah.
for people as
Yeah.
well.
Sure. Yeah.
So we have been getting a number of questions coming through the feeds. And so if you're listening, feel free to continue to send us questions. We will stick around and try to answer as many as we can. And so the first one here, how do I get out of the mindset that my brain is the enemy because of its insistent manner of alerting me to a danger pain symptom that need not exist? And so I'll talk about that in terms of how I say it, that pain is not the enemy, that the pain is actually an ally. And so what we're teaching is that the pain, let me take one step back, and I talk about it frequently in terms of acute pain versus chronic pain. And so if you were to go out and go running and sprain your ankle and have it blow up to the size of a softball, I don't want you to call me and say, like, I'm meditating the best as I can and it still kind of hurts. Am I just not meditating enough? Because it's a medical issue, and we want the pain to be there so that we know that you can take care of it and get it to go down and allow it to heal. If 6 months later you call me and say it still really, really hurts, should I meditate more? At that point, I would say, okay, the pain no longer is pointing to a physical issue, it's pointing to somewhere else. And that's when I would start asking you, anything going on in your life, anything that's different, anything that you can point to on a non-physical level. And so since most of us are used to this model of acute pain, when something happens in our body, we assume that there's a problem in our body. But once it's been there for more than about 6 weeks and it's no longer acute pain, but chronic pain, very rarely is it actually pointing somewhere in the body. Usually it's pointing somewhere else in our lives, a stressor that needs to be healed, an emotion that needs to come out, a relationship that needs tending to, a workplace issue that's not going well. And so the pain becomes not the problem, the pain starts to point to the problem. And so that's the kind of language that I use with my patients regularly to try to remember that the pain is not our enemy. The pain is just trying to deliver some information that we need to know. Next question that's here, if my pain is neuroplastic, does this mean that painkillers are redundant? And so there are lots of ways to manage pain, and you can treat pain on multiple levels. And so what we've been talking about for the past hour is treating pain at the very most basic level. That back pain was not there because there was anything wrong with your discs. Same with the heel pain, same with the arm pain. It was, as I said, it was pointing to someplace that needed attention. And when you gave that the attention, that's when the pain went away. Trying to focus on the disc, trying to do your McKenzie method or anything else, that didn't provide any relief at all. But there's also other layers that we can treat the pain at. And so we can send an injection into the spine and it can temporarily deaden the pain nerves, and we can get some relief that way. It's not going to be long lasting, probably. And I hear that story from people all the time. I got an injection, it lasted for 3 months. It was great. Then it wore off. So I got another injection. This one only lasted for 3 weeks. And then I got a third injection. It didn't work at all. And then we can take medication, and the medication will do that. It will change the chemicals that are bringing the pain signals from various parts in our body into our brain. But after those pain killers wear off in a couple of hours, we're back in the same place. And so it's not that the pain medicine doesn't work at all. It's that it's only treating the pain at the very most surface level that you can, and not only doesn't provide any any lasting relief, but then you have to keep taking it over and over and over again to get relief. And then oftentimes the pain over time, especially with opioids, will increase so that it's even easier for those pain nerves to fire. And so it's not that the pain medication is redundant necessarily, but it's really not doing anything at the underlying issue that's causing the pain. The next question is about inflammatory arthritis in the hands. Will this method still work for inflammatory arthritis? And so I would say that with that one, I am thinking about, is it really, like, do we know it's inflammatory or are we not sure? And so if there's inflammatory arthritis like psoriatic arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, there are chemicals in the body. There's laboratories that we can look at that will show abnormalities. And we can see those abnormalities and we have names for those diseases. And we use a variety of treatments, including this one, in order to make the pain better. And so even if there's true inflammation, we can still use the power of the mind to help to heal the body. Oftentimes, though, people will tell me that they have inflammatory arthritis, and I'll look in their charts, and I won't be able to see any evidence of that. And so it feels like it's inflammation, but we're notoriously bad as human beings at looking inside our bodies and knowing what's going on a biochemical level. And so the way I frequently describe it is that all pain has a physical component, an emotional component, and a psychological component. And that physical component is often much less of the issue than we would have imagined. And so, Dave, when you were first learning about it, you would have thought that the physical component was the entirety of it until you learned about this and learned how it works. And so if we get started on that emotional and psychological component, oftentimes we can make much more headway than we think we would. And oftentimes we can get the pain to go away completely just by working on that level. So whether there's true inflammation or it feels like inflammation without being able to see it in the chemistry, still working on it this way will provide relief in a lot of situations. The next question is about symptom substitution and the brain's strategy in moving the symptoms around. Dave, do you have any sense, when you look back to when you and I first met, 2011, 2012, why the pain had popped up in your arms at that point instead of in your back?
No, I mean, my guess is that we figured it out with the back, right? So the mind is like, okay, that one's not going to work. Been there. He's figured that out. Let's throw in something entirely different. I mean, that's my thought on it. It was kind of random, but yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. I think that the pain and the symptoms are there to distract our attention. And so when you first learned about it, I also assume, especially when I heard you talk today, that it very well may have been that first anniversary or second anniversary of the summer your mother was sick. And those are pretty significant times that pain will flare in people's bodies. And so the pain is there to try to protect us from the painful emotions and memories that are going on. And so if that's what the pain is trying to do, and we know that if we get pain in our back, it's that, then oftentimes it will surface in other places to try to distract us from what we're trying to hold at bay, even though that ultimately entering into that space, in the psychological and emotional space, is oftentimes what will make us better. I oftentimes also hear sort of the story that you told, like you read the book, you got better. And so I've heard that story before of people who get better pretty quickly initially, and then something happens and it pops up either again or somewhere else. And I think that it's possible, especially at the beginning, to get better with the knowledge of what this is, and it's reassuring and it calms us down, but we haven't taken care of the underlying issue. And so if we haven't taken care of the underlying issue, oftentimes it will continue to pop up somewhere until we address it and try to do that. Next question is about finding TMS therapists or physicians. So there are not a lot of TMS physicians around the country. And so I'm here in Chicago, Dr. Howard Schubener's in Detroit, Dr. David Schechter, who's coming on with me next month, is in Los Angeles, Dr. Ira Rashbaum in New York City, and that's really about it. And so we recognize that it's quite difficult to find somebody who's literate in this kind of medicine. And so what my practice has done, especially during COVID, has made me available for consultations with people all over. And so we are working to be able to sustain that even once the COVID crisis is passed, and we are looking at the telehealth laws, and we're committed to being able to consult with anybody no matter where they are. But during this time, if you are interested in talking with me, please feel free to go ahead and contact my office, our website, www.drstracks, all one word, .com, or an email, info@drstracks, stracks.com, will get to us, and we will get back to you and tell you how that works. As far as TMS therapists goes, there are a number of them around the country. I'm on an email list with a couple of hundred of them, and there are lists of who they are at the TMS Wiki, so tmswiki.com, and also the Psychophysiological Disorders Association, I think that's the ppda.com, has a nice list of people all over the country who practice, some of whom are able to do telehealth consultations as well. But feel free to get in touch with our office to learn more about that. You answer the question, what if the strategies that you're using don't work and the shame sets in? And so I get this question a lot, and it's an interesting dynamic I see for people who have been working hard on this and not getting better, and for people who have been working hard on this and getting better but aren't as better as they want to be. And so I start to hear both some self-shaming and even sometimes some peer shaming for people who aren't getting better at the rate they want. So a couple of thoughts about this. Everybody gets better at their own rate, and it's clearly not a competition sport. And so everybody is working on this as hard as they can and is improving in ways that they're able. There are lots of different models of getting better. Dave talked about a couple. And so the first time you got better, like you just got better, a week or two went by and you were back doing what you wanted to do. The second time you got better, it was similar, like you got better, but it was a lot shallower curve. And it wouldn't surprise me if there were some ups and downs along the way.
I'm sure there were, yeah.
If another model that I've seen people do is they do a lot of work and they just don't quite get anywhere for a long time. And then ultimately it starts to kick in and they start to get better. But for a lot of people, like it takes a while of sort of getting this mindset, trying the strategies, doing the work before they really see a lot of benefit. And so patience is not an infrequent necessity as people are doing this. I've had panel discussions like this before where my patients talk about their experiences. And one day I had somebody who got like 20% better each week for 5 weeks, and then he was done, talking with somebody who got like 1% better each week for 100 weeks before she was significantly better. And so everybody goes at their own rate. Being kind to ourselves is such an important part of getting better. And so in my office and in my consultations, I've come up with a list of 20 reasons that pain will set in and stick around that we sometimes need to work on. But right at the top of that list is the self-criticism and the lack of self-compassion. And so it is essential that we keep in mind the need to be kind to ourselves, be patient with ourselves. And when we're struggling and we're frustrated, that's when the kindness and patience needs to be the strongest. And then I will also say to people regularly that sometimes there are issues underneath the surface that are just too difficult for us to work on all by ourselves. And so for people who've been struggling about this for a long time and not finding that they're getting where they want to go, sometimes it does take helping professionals of all kinds to be able to take the steps that you need to make. I've got 2 podcasts that I've done with Laura on Caribou's podcast, Like Mind, Like Body. The first one, I talk about how very similar stories to Dave's. I had symptoms for 9 months. Nobody could get a handle on them. Everybody thought they were something different. But once I knew what they were, I was a great deal better very quickly. And then over the course of a couple of months, the pain went away and didn't come back. And then the second podcast is about a flare-up I had when I left the big hospital and opened my own practice 3 years ago. And that one lingered and didn't go away. And ultimately, I needed to reach out to some of my friends and colleagues to help me through some things that I couldn't do on my own. And so there are definitely times where, despite everything that we're doing on our own, that helping professionals need to be involved in order to allow us to take steps that we can't take on our own. Next question is about parents. So the trigger is a parent and you cannot avoid him or her. It's a horrendous merry-go-round. Dave, I know that you had said that you had tried to talk to your father about it. That was not for you. That was, I think, for his issues that were going on. But he wasn't buying it, was he?
No, he wasn't buying it at all. But it sounds like the question is the person asking the question is having a challenging relationship with a parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be really, really stressful, you know?
Absolutely. And so another one of the big categories that I talk about regularly is the is that of being able to set boundaries effectively. And if you're living with a parent or if they're around all the time, that can be quite difficult. But boundaries is about knowing what belongs to us and what belongs to other people and how to know the difference between the two. Another way I've heard it described is about the difference between what's okay and what's not okay. And when we're in those places of somebody who's crossing our boundaries, the pain oftentimes will serve as a boundary violation meter. And so the symptoms can pop up to help us know that somebody's encroaching on our space and we need to protect ourselves in one way or another. And a full discussion of boundaries is beyond what we can do in the moment here. But I frequently say that there are 2 important components to setting boundaries. One is setting the boundary. The second is reinforcing the boundary. And the reinforcements are even more important than setting the boundaries. And so we have to say to people, this is not okay. And if it continues to happen, this is what we're going to do about it. And we're doing that work with parents and family members is super advanced communication. But if you can learn about it and you can learn what boundaries look like and where yours are and why they're not always effective and what you can do to reinforce them, it can make a huge difference in people's experience. So we've got time for, I think, 2 more questions. So I'm going to go ahead and read those. This one says, experience with one kind of pain going along for a while, and then since the pandemic and COVID, they've been doing well. They've been growing spiritually and emotionally, and then all of a sudden, the fibromyalgia pain came back and becomes debilitating again when their life is moving in a positive direction. And so, Dave, I don't know if you have any thoughts or have had any experiences with pain coming on despite things going well in your life?
Yeah, I mean, when my back pain started, things were going well. I mean, I'm generally a pretty positive, happy person. So I would say probably every time I felt like things were going well. And I mean, there were, we've talked about it, experiences with death and things, but I mean, to me, it goes back to, it's not just about the conscious, mind, what's going on, that there are other things going on. And, that's kind of the great unknown, and trying to figure that out is an adventure, I guess. But that's what worked for me.
Yeah, and then, I had told Dave the story about like me thinking for 48 hours that I had carpal tunnel syndrome. And like I do think that there are some breakthroughs that I've made. Like I frequently, when I'm talking with people during this time of quarantine and pandemic, have asked people what they see as potential hidden benefits of the quarantine for them. One of the hidden benefits for me has been that since all I'm really doing is working and being with my kids, and we're not like shepherding people to baseball games and piano lessons and theater rehearsals, it's given me more time to work on this than I normally have. And I feel like I've put together some new ideas and some new theories and have taken some new trainings that I'm super excited about. And I also said, I've been doing all this yoga and my body's been feeling really good and I'm more flexible than I've been in years. And so I think that sometimes as we move up into that plane, like it starts to get a little bit scary. And we get higher and we look down, all of a sudden we're like, whoa, like how do I get up so high? And I think temporarily, like we can stumble and fall back a little bit. And so I do think it's a skill to be able to retain our equilibrium as we're climbing higher, and to recognize that what we feel in our body is just a little bit of resistance to the climbing higher and to the successes. So last question that we'll answer, and I know that there are a number of questions that we didn't get to, but both you and I, Dave, haven't really talked much about the Freudian approach favored by Dr. Sarno. Was there anything that turned you off about that or sort of didn't make sense to you? And I've got thoughts about that that I'll mention in a second.
Well, I think that was initially, really, really hard for me to accept. And so it took a while, but I did start to buy into it. And I know that this whole practice has evolved, but I still think that there is something to that. And yeah, but it was not easy for me to accept that right away at all. The fact that you have this unconscious mind that is doing things, now it kind of makes a lot of sense. We know about a lot of things that we do unconsciously, but it was totally foreign to me at the time. And yeah, it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
I also know that, as a medical system, we don't do a lot of Freudian work, I think, in any places at the moment. And so Dr. Sarno talked a lot about the inner rage being the cause of the symptoms. And I think one of the things we've learned is that while rage can cause symptoms, it's by no means the only reason that symptoms develop. And so I get that question regularly from people who come and see me and consult with me, and they say that I've looking where's the rage? I'm not a rageful person. And sometimes it's inner annoyance, or sometimes it's sadness and grief or guilt or shame, or even what we're just talking about, joy or happiness, or too much attention to the symptoms, or the inability to draw a boundary effectively in the situation that you're in, or too much criticism that's aimed at ourselves. And so I think we've discovered lots of different reasons that our body will hold on to our life experiences and express them in physical ways. And so the theories that initially came out in Dr. Sarno's work in the 20th century, I think are accurate, and we've really been able to build on them and find both new understanding of why the symptoms are there, and increasingly new strategies that work for people for for moving forward and healing. So anyway, it's about 6:15. Dave, I don't want to keep you any longer, and I want to respect everybody else's time as well. And so we're going to wrap up here. I have a couple of housekeeping issues to go over before we sign off. Dave, is there any final thoughts that you would like to leave people with before we sign off for the evening?
Well, I mean, thank you for watching and listening. I think the fact that you're doing that is a great step. And I would just say, stay with it. You know, it was, you know, I say it was 3 months the second time around. It was probably longer. It's hard for me to remember exactly, but I remember it was hard. And I just, I stayed with it. And like Dr. Stracks said, everybody's different. But if you stay with it, I really, really think that you're going to find some amazing results. And when you do, you're going to be, it's amazing. You know, it really is. It's life-changing.
Thanks so much for being here with us this evening and donating your time to talk about it. As we've said, you know, I've heard you tell your story in groups to my patients multiple times. I know how helpful it's been for my patients to talk to you individually. And thank you again for being such a great ambassador for
Sure, happy to do it.
medical
Thanks.
care. So before we sign off, a couple things to go over. There's a free event coming up for Curable on June 22nd called Change Your Mind About Pain with Curable Groups. And so Curable Groups are their 12-week intensive boot camp and involves working through weekly video workshops while talking with a supportive group of peers and also receiving guidance along the way from some of the top people in this field like Dr. Schubiner and me and a few others. And so it's the only opportunity this summer to join the groups. And so if you're interested, Curable is also giving away a printable workbook. And so even if you decide not to attend, it's worth your time. It's June 22nd. The RSVP for that is www.curablegroups.com. Also, as I said, if people are interested in talking with me, we're able to do that at least during this COVID time. And the intent is to be able to do that indefinitely. And so you can go to our website, www.drstracks.com, and send us a message or send us an email at info@drstracks.com. And then finally, I will be back here in 3 weeks, same 5 o'clock Central Time on July 8th with my close friend and colleague, Dr. David Schechter, out in Los Angeles, who's been doing this work for literally 3 decades. And so we'll be talking about what he's learned over that time. And then he and I will be talking about the information that we continue to gather that helps people move forward and heal. And so with that, we will sign off for the evening. Thank you to everybody who has been here, asked such insightful questions. I am always touched by people who are brave enough to enter into this space in medicine and work on healing their pain and other symptoms in this incredibly effective mind-body way. So I hope everybody continues to stay safe and has a great 4th of July holiday. And I will see you back here on July 8th at 5 p.m. Central Time. Thanks again, Dave. Great to see you.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
And have a great evening, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.